United States going into World War II, after we were attacked by the Japanese, we haven't gotten there, have we? Obviously, we're still leading up in the video, but I want to plant this seed in your head so when you see it, you're like, oh, that's why these people were here, that's why these people were here. The U.S. was going to be fighting a two-front war. Does that make sense? You're fighting to the west against the Japanese, and you're fighting to the east against the Germans and the Italians. So there's two theaters of war, is what we call it. So we have the Pacific theater, and we have the European theater. And I should throw in Africa with the European theater because that's where the United States actually first lands and launches, our first major offensive against the Axis powers in Africa. So those are the two fronts. Put this in your notes if you're not already making this little T-chart. You would think maybe that because the Japanese directly attacked us, they would be our first priority. But you'd be wrong. So right after the Japanese attacked at Pearl Harbor, Germany declared war on us, and we followed suit and declared war on them. And it was decided that Europe, the European theater, defeating the Nazis should be the priority. Even though the Nazis hadn't launched any major offensives against us, had they? So why do you think, does anybody have a clue or a guess, why we prioritized attacking Germany before going on the offensive? Now, we still were fighting against the Japanese. We were fighting a defensive war against the Japanese. They were doing very well against us. Does anybody know why we prioritized the European theater first?
Because they were stronger and they had a bigger, they were taking over more than the Japanese.
Okay. I would say both were quite strong, but I like where you're going with it. I think what you mean is we thought that Germany was a bigger threat overall, and I would agree with that. And I think that's the decision that our leadership came to as well. What do you think?
They took over Poland.
Okay, so they attacked Poland, which was an ally of Great Britain and France. And by the time the Japanese attacked us, hadn't they already overrun the French too? Yeah. So what are you getting at? Are you getting at the fact that Britain and France were strong American allies? Yeah. So there you have it. The real reason we came to Europe's aid first as an offensive force. Yeah, we were being defensive out here, defending ourselves as best we could, but we put our mass focus for an offensive here because they were attacking our friends directly, our strongest friends. France, again, we've been military allies from the start of our nation with France, right? And at that point, it had been 40, 50 years of pretty close relations with Britain, too, especially as a trade partner. So we decided and by the time the Japanese brought us into the war, Britain was pretty bad off. We were afraid, France had already fallen, we were afraid Britain was going to fall next. If Britain fell, who's left as an ally in Europe? Nobody. You say USSR? Remember, they signed the non-aggression pact with the Nazis. And it took them a while to backstab them. So, who are you going to support? And so, yeah, the Russia maybe was going to help out. I don't know. But so good thinking. But really, we didn't have any friends left in Europe if Britain falls. And then what happens? If all of Europe is controlled by the Nazis, where can the Nazis direct their energy? Towards us or towards the Russians. But it's like we probably want to go on the offensive. Are you going to be able to go on the offensive in the Pacific right away without a strong naval force with more than 2 aircraft carriers? No, the answer is no. So check out this map, the globe. The Atlantic side, if I point this right at you, you can see a lot of the continents on either side of it, right? So the Atlantic's a big ocean. How about if I turn the Pacific straight at you? You can barely see any land on either side, right? It's a third of the Earth's surface, pretty much, is the Pacific. Which has more islands? The Atlantic or the Pacific? The Pacific, right? A lot of islands. And the Japanese wrestled a lot of the control of those islands away from us and away from France and Britain. So we focus on a defensive war in the Pacific, and we can go on the offensive in Europe. Because otherwise, if you just play the defensive over here, focus over here, not able to go on the offensive anyway for a year or two, if Germany wins in Europe, now you're fighting a defensive war on two fronts, right? Better to be fighting defensive on one and offensive on the other while you can. So the other thing I want to say, before we get back to the video, because I talk too much, so this would be the second priority. We're fighting in both theaters at the same time, but the priority is here first, okay? Who do you send as far as your military assets? Who do you think, what branch of the military is going to be better suited for island hopping in the Pacific? The Army and Air Force or the Navy with the Marine Corps? So when you think of the Marine Corps, the word Marines, what does the word Marine mean?
Ocean.
Water-based, right? So Marines are trained, they're specialized for amphibious warfare, which means they can fight on land and at sea. They can get onto ships and off of ships quickly over and over and over again. For island hopping is perfect. And that's what the United States has to do against Japan. To get close enough to attack the mainland Japan, they've got to get through these lines of defensive islands. So they take one at a time. You know, the strategic islands. They're not going to. The U.S. wasn't interested in capturing every single small island. They picked and choose the strategically important ones. So anyway, yeah, the Navy and the Marine Corps are responsible for the Pacific theater. And then you have the Army and the Army Air Corps. There actually was not an Air Force, a specific branch called the Air Force that didn't exist. You had the Army Air Corps. And of course the Navy had airplanes too, right? That they would launch off of what?
Carriers.
The boats, the aircraft carriers, yeah. So early in the war, we only had 3, and then a couple of them got damaged. All of them got damaged. At one point, I think there was only 1 carrier out. I think it was the Enterprise, I want to say. A little fuzzy on my history. But I want to say that the Enterprise at one point was the only aircraft carrier left to fight while the others were repairing and while we put more into action. So the Japanese had a huge advantage in the Pacific early on. That's why they were so dominant over us in the Pacific militarily. Army, Air Corps makes sense in Europe or North Africa because you've got large pieces of land that you're fighting on. So the Army's the way to go there because that's what the Army does. We fight on land. And then the Air Corps can provide air support. So, does that make sense? Why we chose, if you ever watch old war movies and stuff, you'll see if it's a Pacific Theater movie, predominantly it's going to be Navy and Marines. And if it's in Europe, it's predominantly going to be Army and Army Air Corps. That's not to say that you'd have, you did have some U.S. Navy operating in the Atlantic, for sure. But we didn't need that many of our Navy ships operating in the Atlantic. Why? Who's our main ally that's left over there? Britain. Who's got an amazing fleet? Britain. Certainly more powerful than the German fleet. So we were able to piggyback on a lot of their naval might over here. So we were able to send the majority of our naval assets to the Pacific to face off against the Japanese. At the start of World War II, number 1 and number 2 military or naval forces in the world, right at the top you had Japan and Great Britain. That was it. So we couldn't really, it was great that we had the British in the Atlantic for that purpose. All right, cool. I'll shut up.